Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, February 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 192 days. The game against Michigan in 283 days. When they play the game against Michigan in 283 days, Ohio State's going to have a new offensive coordinator. His name is Chip Kelly. Michigan's going to have a new defensive coordinator. His name is Wink Martindale. We're going to be talking about Martindale on today's show with our buddy Ross Fulton, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com. When we have Ross on the show, we are proudly sponsored by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Make your reservations today and check out the mouth-watering menu at jeffruby.com/Columbus. All right, so Ross, let's talk a little bit about Wink Martindale. The takes were flying as soon as his name got sort of floated, and then when he ended up getting hired, he was just let go from the Giants. But before he was with the Giants, he was with the Ravens. So obviously, the Ravens defensive staff has been a place where Michigan has pulled some pretty successful defensive coordinators over the last couple of years. But it sounds like Martindale is not necessarily a carbon copy of Mike MacDonald, who replaced him with the Ravens, or Jesse Minter, who came from the Ravens and preceded Wink Martindale at Michigan.
Yeah, I know. I think that the first assumption people have is like, oh, this is just the Ravens tree. Michigan's going to continue doing what they're doing. But in actuality, it's a pretty significant change, or I guess you'd say at least somewhat of a change. Yes, MacDonald and Minter worked under Wink Martindale, but they shifted the scheme pretty significantly from Michigan, and now you can see it with the Ravens as well. What Mike MacDonald's done there. Andrew Patton on X had a good post comparing like the use of coverages between Martindale's years with the Ravens and what MacDonald's done since then. And like the big difference is that Wink Martindale uses a lot less two high coverage schemes than MacDonald and Minter have used at Michigan. So, like as particularly like when it comes to like fire zones, 5-man pressures or, creepers or sim pressures, 4-man pressures where you're dropping a defensive lineman. Michigan did a lot of that with two high looks. Like we talked about against Ohio State, they used a lot of concepts like two steal where they're dropping a defensive end in the flat as like the cover two defender and rotating the coverage to the field. Like you just didn't see Martindale doing nearly as much of that. It's much more man, much more single high cover three, when they use fire zones or creepers. It's more akin to what Don Brown did at Michigan or, what like Jeff Hafley did at Ohio State with a lot of single high emphasis. Now, obviously, like he could pick up what, Michigan had been doing and, see if it was working and, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that at least is not what his background has been.
Well, and I'm going to put that chart on the screen if I remember to do it while I'm editing this together later. But the plan is to put that chart on the screen here because it is a really interesting chart. And what jumped out to me was he's playing more cover zero in certain situations than MacDonald did later when he took over for Martindale with the Ravens. But he plays more cover one too. So as you said, just more man coverage in general and bringing pressure, cover one, cover zero, man cover, like that all has sort of invited the Don Brown comparisons. And you sort of mentioned there's some similarities there. I think Ohio State fans look at Don Brown as that's the guy that gave up 62 points in 2018. I don't know that's necessarily going to be Ryan Day already has unlocked the key to defeating this guy's defensive playbook. I don't think it's necessarily that simple.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like this is why, as I said, like the first reaction a lot of people had is like, oh, continue the Ravens tree. And, then you got like this, smart, Michigan football X's and O's guys like Space Coyote and Manuel Excel, like, I don't know about this because we're stepping away from what had worked so well. As I said on X this week, Martindale is much more, as you said, in the Don Brown lineage, whereas like MacDonald and Minter, what they actually have been doing is much more like Vic Fangio-esque for those who like follow NFL X's and O's, like a lot of that split safety, like quarter, half, mixing in, as I said, like sim pressures with two high safeties. But as you said, like it is different also than what Don Brown, like that again is like a shorthand, but he'll Don Brown liked to use like a lot of straight cover one and then mix in cover two. And, there were games where Don Brown gave Ohio State like a lot of fits as well. Like, when Dwayne Haskins had to come in for JT Barrett. So it wasn't all easy street, as it maybe people remember in hindsight. But, Martindale will use a lot more sort of like the term people like to throw in. I was like the amoeba defense where, you have 7 guys up on the line and you don't know who's coming and who's dropping. Like, yes, it'll be a lot of man and cover 3 behind that. So whereas like Don Brown did not at all like to use cover 3 as a changeup, like Martindale uses a lot of that as well. And you'll get like, as I said, pressure looks with that. So there's some overlap. Definitely would be moving Michigan back towards much more of a single high based scheme, and a lot much more man. And, I think from a Michigan perspective, it's a question of like opposite Will Johnson. Like, do they have the corner play to run that much man? But there are also differences in terms of the other coverage mix compared to Don Brown.
Well, and going back to that chart real quickly, the one thing that really jumped out to me immediately was, the whole chart is cover 0. So that's where you don't have a safety back, and it's just kind of, hope your pressure gets home, hope your coverage guys can cover because there's no one back there playing deep safety. So it's 7%, 8%, 10% every year. The only year that it's higher than 10.7% is 2019 for Martindale in Baltimore when it was 15.8%. And the accompanying tweet from Andrew Patton says, remember that 2019 Ravens defensive back room was nuts. The Michigan defensive back room this year, they got Will Johnson. They've got some solid safeties coming back as well. You got to figure out what you're doing on the other side of the field. It feels like he might be able to be aggressive this year, especially if you've got Will Johnson on one side of the field, if they can find someone on the other side of the field. But that may, if you're willing to be super aggressive in the year when you can do it, and then you're not the other years, you're not super wedded to the idea that, well, we have to just do this because this is what we do. So that kind of suggests good coaching to me. So, but are they going to be able to do that potentially this year, and then maybe going to have to adjust next year once they don't have Will Johnson on the roster, presumably anymore?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I thought this year they got away with having Josh Wallace as their other quarter, and they were able to do it somewhat by protecting him with the myriad of coverage schemes that Jesse Minter was using. And now, obviously, that's an open question. They do have really experienced safeties. Now, again, you're like asking, cover 0. You're asking those safeties to play man coverage. So, safeties can have different skill sets. Even when like MacDonald or Minter use cover 0, they were usually dropping guys into sort of underneath zones. Like the like one coverage is called train, where you drop both defensive ends as sort of hook players. And so again, it was, I would say, less overtly aggressive. And yeah, I think that corner position begs the question. But yeah, as you said, I will give, Wink Martindale the benefit of the doubt that he can adapt somewhat. And then again, I think it'll be interesting to see, how much he picks up what Michigan has been doing and tries to continue that, versus, going with his natural inclinations, which is to play single high. But yeah, I think Michigan, they still have a lot of guys back on defense. I think it's certainly, so they do have the experience pieces there to put in some of the more complex blitz packages.
All right, and now to wrap up, I have to ask the question that's way overly simplistic, but leads to the splashy headline. Ross, Chip Kelly versus Wink Martindale. Who you got? Who has improved their chances? Who has improved themselves schematically? How do these guys match up? Obviously, this is a little tongue-in-cheek. It's a little bit, there's a lot of stuff that goes in. They're not running the Chip Kelly offense, for example. But, when you just look at these two guys, is there anything that jumps out to you as, oh, this might be good for Michigan, or hey, the way Ohio State's going to maybe try to run the ball might give them Michigan problems? Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, I think that, obviously a lot of experience being brought up between the two guys. I think that, again, like what we talked about last week, Chip Kelly fills something that Ohio State has been lacking or needs improvement upon in the run game. Whereas I tend to agree with, Space Coyote and others that I referenced earlier that, if I was Michigan, I would want to keep going what I had going on defense. And so I think stepping away from that mix, I would consider that a step back as well. in particular, I thought Michigan's had a lot of success against Ohio State the last few years, and Ryan Day using those sort of cover two schemes where you're bringing guys from different angles and then rotating your cover two the field. So you're stout against the run to the short field. We talked about boundary stretch, but you're playing the multiple receivers to the field. So I do think that again, like having a combination of a more diverse run game for Ohio State, plus I think Ryan Day, if you give him a lot of single high coverages, has had a lot of success over the years. So I think that's probably a plus for Ohio State vis-a-vis Michigan. But again, I think both teams have a lot. Ohio State has a lot coming back on offense. Michigan has a lot coming back on defense. So just like when you're looking at personnel, it should be another top matchup.
Yeah, definitely one to look forward to. Only 283 days away. Go ahead and start packing the trunk. Tailgating will start soon. We'll be out there at Ohio Stadium sooner than you think for what is definitely going to be one of the most anticipated games of the year in all of the college football schedule. We were looking forward to that one. We're looking forward to the spring game. There's a lot to look forward to, and a great place to look forward to all of it is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Ross is one of our X's and O's guys, making you a smarter football fan, along with Mickey and Justin and Devin, Mark covering the team, Mark covering recruiting, Tony, Kevin, and I covering the team. It's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, thank you again to our sponsor, Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus. Named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus, check out the menu, and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.